I've always been able to keep my private life private, and I've always been very good at covering my private life from my public life. I've always been able to not let anyone get too close to me so that I would not have to expose any vulnerability or any underlying feelings or insecurities. I've had a traumatic childhood, and my mother was abusive and cold, physically and verbally, and she ultimately ended up mentally ill. Her diagnosis was schizophrenia. Her mother was very proper and very quiet, very, very proper.
When you say proper?
Very English proper. Everything was just right. Everything was just so. And there was this air of absolute coldness to my grandmother. There was no warmth that came off of her at all, none. I think she looked her whole life for acceptance from her mother and from other people, and never was able to get that acceptance she was looking for. I believe that when she started to enter menopause or perimenopause, she started to suffer from depression and isolation, and isolated herself. She would spend all day, some days, sitting in a chair just looking down with her arms crossed. We would find her, she would come and pick us up from school and come right back and sit in the family room with her arms crossed, quiet, looking down, always depressed. And I think over a period of time, that isolation caused her to think too much. I honestly don't know. I was never really close to her. I was never able to really get close to her, to warm up to her. When I was younger, there was physical abuse. She, if anything would go wrong or if anything happened, I was always to blame. So typically she would beat me because I was curious, and I climbed up into the cabinet and I found her little bottle that she kept up there and took the cap off, and it smelled like alcohol. And I was stupid enough to ask a question because she was an alcoholic and hid that from everyone. And she beat me then, dragged me off the cabinet and really beat me. And the only other incident I can remember is one time she had a stormy relationship with my father, and she told us that we were leaving. So she always made my brother and I feel insecure, like we were leaving and we were going to go and live with my grandmother. And so one time she actually made us pack some things, and we were going to move in with my grandmother. And on the way to my grandmother's house, she got into a car accident because she was drinking. And we lived in an extremely small town in western Pennsylvania, so someone went and got my father, and when he got to the scene of the accident, she had her bottle of vodka like tucked up under her sweater, and it was obvious that she was drunk. They took her to the hospital. They had to pump her stomach, and my brother and I were injured. My face was all black and blue because I had apparently fallen off the seat and blacked out. And I can only remember coming home from the hospital and my father saying to her that if my face stayed black and blue like that, he would kill her. Really don't let anyone get to know the real me. There are very few people who actually know the real me.
And the real you is?
The real me, who's a lot more, a lot more vulnerable and insecure and afraid and very human, very different than the mask that I wear. The happy, how are you, positive all the time, I can do anything. My son, who has been recently diagnosed with schizophrenia, I just assumed that everything was going to be okay. I never expected him to have this mental illness, and I wasn't really paying attention to all of the signs that were there from a very young age. And I wasn't looking, and I didn't have my eyes open because I didn't want to see it, and I didn't want to believe it. And when it was obvious that he needed help and I needed to hospitalize him, it just came crashing down on me. It was right in my face, and I could no longer ignore it or pretend it didn't exist or hide it or be ashamed of it. I had to face it. I could no longer run from it, and I needed to deal with it.
Right.
And more than dealing with it, I finally have found the compassion for him that I never had for her. The one thing that I'm so thankful for is that I actually do feel compassion, true compassion. And all of my judgments and all of my embarrassment and shame is gone because I now feel the compassion. I spent my whole life running and not even realizing it. And it seems as though this very sad illness has actually been a blessing to me to help me to find who I am and what's inside of me.